welcome to our Season 2 commentary from Boise, Idaho. This is your host, Adam Graham. As was the case with our Season 1 commentary, this episode will not feature full-length episodes, although we are going to have some clips thrown in. Now, Season 2 will be released pretty much the same way that Season 1 was. We'll begin with 4 weeks where we're releasing one episode Monday through Friday, and then proceed through a period where we will be releasing 20 episodes a week, and plus if there happens to be a special in a given week. Now, we will actually have a bit of a slowdown come January and February, where we will return to just 1 week's worth of episodes each week before accelerating again starting at the end of February. Now, I'll go ahead and start off by talking about the biggest change that does happen in Season 2 overall in terms of our production. For the first season, our episodes were released in a 32 kbps file format. The reason for that was concerns about the audio files being too long to download and making it hard for as many listeners as might be interested in listening to the podcast to join in. Now, for most people listening to this in 2022, concerns about people not being able to quickly download a 14 megabyte or 15 megabyte a half-hour podcast file might seem a little bit silly. And perhaps they were starting to get silly in 2009 when the podcast started. However, I was a relatively recent to actually having broadband internet. I had been on a dial-up modem as late as the early 2000s, so I was sensitive to making these audio files too big. But Andrew Ryan's, credit where credit is due, really did push for us to increase the quality to 64 kbps, which has led to higher quality audio files than we had during the first season. Without him, I have no idea how long I would have stuck with that 32 kbps format. Now, of course, we continue the 64 to this day, and it's a pretty good, I think, compromise level for old-time radio podcast. Because even though we do deal with some higher quality encodes these days, there are still a lot where you could make the kbps as high as you want, and it's still not going to make a bit of difference, because you're dealing with old recordings. Plus, I think that the size is good so that you can have the broadest number of people, not only in the United States, but around the world, able to download and enjoy the podcast. Now, the ironic part of this whole issue is, and this is something I only thought about when I was thinking about this season, is while I was worried about the file size on our audio podcast, we actually had both video and audio in the same feed. So that meant that every month, listeners would be hit with a 200 megabyte audio file in their feed, which was a whole lot more of a challenge than getting a 64 kbps, 15 megabyte audio file. So it was like I was concerned about the size of water bottle that I was giving people every day while I was shoving a fire hose in their throat once a month. I was well-intentioned, but clearly I guess I'd not thought everything through. Now, like with our Season 1 commentary, we're going to go through Season 2 day by day. And of course, that means starting with Monday. Actually, after Box 13, I wasn't quite ready to let Alan Ladd go. And we started the season with an episode of Screen Directors Playhouse featuring Alan Ladd, which to me has a bit of a Box 13 feel to it. Then we came to a series that some listeners had asked for. Many programs that listeners requested were not things we could get to just because there were so many episodes of given programs. Things like Richard Diamond, for example. But one thing that listeners requested that it was relatively easy to give them was The Thin Man, because there were not a lot of episodes of it. The Thin Man was in the schedule for only 10 weeks. We featured the 2 Lux Radio Theater adaptations of Thin Man movies, and then played the 8 circulating episodes of The Adventures of the Thin Man. And I hesitate to call it a series, because the Thin Man episodes circulating are 8 episodes spread out over the course of about 6 years with different creative teams, different actors playing Nick Charles, and different approaches to the characters. The one constant in the Thin Man series was Claudia Morgan, who played Nora Charles in every incarnation of the series. I mostly found all of the episodes entertaining. I lean in more towards the ones with a detective comedy approach that still has a solid mystery. Sadly, all these years later, no episodes of The Thin Man have come into circulation, leaving it one of those series that has been most butchered by lost episodes. Still, there are a few that remain that give us a hint of how good the series was.
Hello! Who was that? Some idiot Nora promised to marry last night.
That ain't possible. You can't be married to 2 idiots at the same time.
Guy screamed just before he hung up. Eb, what could have happened to Nora? Hello?
Hello? This is Leo.
Hello, Leo. What do you want?
$200, of course.
What for?
The mirror, naturally. It's cheap. But that's Leo for you. Always a sucker for a beautiful dame.
Listen, I don't know anything about this.
But didn't your wife tell you about me?
No.
Oh, that's deceptive.
Where'd you last see my wife?
In Leo's. The gathering place of convivial spirits. She left after she broke the mirror behind my bar. Why?
My wife didn't get home. I've been looking everywhere for her.
Andre knows, Bud. You shouldn't let a dame like that go around loose.
That's just it. Was she loose?
Well, I'd say she was tight.
That's impossible. Nora never gets tight.
Does she throw horseshoes at mirrors in her natural state?
Where did she get a horseshoe?
From a horse, naturally.
Who was my wife with?
One was a female lady of interesting design. The other was a male gentleman of designing interest.
What are you talking about?
The guy I know. His name is Bill Martin, and no good. The dame I didn't know.
Listen, I'll be down to your place. Where is it?
On 6th Avenue, the village. You know what I'd do if I had a wife like yours, Bud?
No, what?
I'd lock her and me in a golden cage and throw away the key. Bye.
Goodbye, Leo. Oh, Eb, this is the zaniest thing that ever happened.
Nora. And everything. How are you, Effie?
Fine, Norrie. How are you? Or is it a military secret?
I'm feeling deliriously hilarious. Have you ever walked on bubbles?
No, dear.
It requires the greatest delicacy, and it's hard to keep your balance. Kiss me, darling.
Nora, what have you been drinking?
I didn't touch the drop. All I had was one teeny wee cup of tea.
Tea?
With crumpet tea.
Where were you last night?
Kiss me first.
There. Now, where were you last night?
Last night? Well, darling, I had tea with Joan Lawrence, and then... Then I don't remember. That's all.
Most of our Monday series are quite a bit longer than 8 weeks, generally in the 40 to 80 episode range. However, since Claudia Morgan featured in all of the Adventures of the Thin Man series, I decided to play another series in which she starred from 1955, The Adventures of the Abbots. It's an interesting series. It was obscure, and I think it's fair to say that it had been pretty well forgotten until a few years before we played the series, and 16 episodes on Armed Forces Radio and Television Services disc came into circulation. The programs themselves, I think, had better sound quality than many of the other programs from the mid-1950s that we were dealing with at the time. Although I think there have been some better encodes of Rocky Fortune and Dragnet come into circulation. Now, Claudia Morgan plays Jean Abbott through all of these circulating episodes, but actually there were 3 different actors to play the lead character of Pat Abbott, and the 16 episodes we have include episodes featuring Les Damon as well as Mandel Kramer. Both were capable actors and good, solid leading men. I have a soft spot in my heart for this series. I think that there's some really solid action, some good romantic moments, and some pretty good mysteries. This one, in my mind, is an underrated gem, and I hope when you get to listen to it in Season 2 that you'll enjoy it as well.
Pat! Where are you, Pat?
Jean.
Where are you?
Jean, darling. You hurt?
Oh, no. I'm all right. Are you, dear?
Yes. Just a little shaken up. Oh. Can you stand up?
I think so. Wait till I unfasten the belt.
Here, let me help you.
I'm okay. I'm pretty dizzy, though. Oh, golly, the plane's all in one piece.
Yeah, so let's get out of here fast. It might catch fire. That emergency exit's open. See it up ahead?
What is it? Where are you? I can't see you.
Over here. Dr. Rhodes.
Is he hurt?
He's out. Cold.
Oh, Pat, there's the pilot outside. He'll help. In here. There's someone hurt in here.
All right. Take it easy. I have a flashlight.
Oh, please.
Shine it this way. That's it. That chap got it bad, didn't he?
Oh, his head.
Well, I sent someone for an ambulance. They'll fix him up. I don't think so. Why not? He's dead.
He is. Oh, no.
Too bad that confounded motor had to blow like that. Well, you two come on out. We'll take care of him. Watch your step, Jean. That's it.
Gosh. Dark and cold out here. Ooh. What is this, a swamp?
No, we're about 80 miles from London. There's a hospital down the road. I sent there for help. I'll be back. Have to see about the other passengers.
Ooh. So cold. Did you see anything, Pat? It's so foggy.
No, not much.
Darling, we should get down on our knees and thank God for that pilot. I never thought we'd walk away from this landing.
Uh-huh.
What are you doing? Get away from that motor. It's broken. It's liable to explode or something.
Uh-huh.
Pat, will you listen to me?
Yeah, huh?
Fine thing. A man nearly gets killed in an airplane crash, and what's he do? Calmly strolls around examining motors. With all the coat...
Jean, that motor is in awfully good shape.
It just doesn't make any sense to... Good shape?
Yes. Looks like nothing's wrong with it at all.
Oh, but
Yes,
darling...
I know. We had a crash landing. The puzzle, huh? Yes, and when you've got the answer to that, you might try telling me how Dr.
Ideal in Crime is a series that I did because the star of that series, William Gargan, was also the star of Barrie Craig, Confidential Investigator, which was the next really traditional Monday series that we would do. Ideal in Crime was one of the first of the hard-boiled detective series. After Rogue's Gallery, it came out along with The Fat Man and just before Sam Spade hit the airwaves. In its first episode, as you'll hear in a second, it started off a bit over the top. Now, we only have 3 episodes of the series, but it does seem to have improved over time. Although we probably should be careful on judging too much. We've got the first episode, the 12th episode, and the 89th episode of a series that ran for nearly 2 years. It wasn't a bad series, and I'd love to hear more on the off chance that more comes into circulation. But that brings me to my favorite William Gargan series, Barrie Craig, Confidential Investigator. And I really was looking forward to doing this series and enjoyed going through every episode. While you can have some hard-boiled action and mystery, Barrie Craig as a character is slightly more laid back, though that shouldn't cause you to underestimate him. There's quiet confidence and a real ease about the character. This was also the 3rd radio detective that Gargan had performed. And he knows exactly what type of performance he's trying to give. And he turns in this just delightful, very natural performance. While Barrie Craig is rarely talked about among the titans of the old-time radio detective series, this is a real delight to listen to.
What'll it be, Bud?
Does it have to be anything?
I seen one of those before.
Back up. Against the wall, huh?
Sure.
Hold it, Craig.
The personal touch?
Just sit there. Work on your donuts and coffee.
I eat just as well without a gun.
That's to keep you quiet, not stimulate your appetite.
Thanks for explaining. Why do I have to be quiet?
I want it that way.
Uh-huh. This Keep Craig Quiet Week?
Yeah. I just passed the resolution.
In a little while, I'm going to get sleepy.
Don't let it bother you.
My point is, do I have to be quiet only in Willie's wagon, or can I go be quiet at home?
Craig.
Yeah?
I tried for you at your office first. The elevator man told me you'd probably be here.
Jake's a prophet.
Anybody else comes calling for you, the elevator man will tell him the same thing.
You make it sound like a procession visiting Craig at midnight. Business isn't that good.
Not a procession. One customer.
You could give him a name?
Sure.
And when he gets here, what happens?
I discourage him about consulting you.
You reason with him?
I discourage him.
Hey, Bud, how about me sitting down?
You got a seat back at the counter?
No, but there's one in the kitchen.
Also a telephone?
I ain't checked recent.
Keep leaning against the wall.
This customer of mine, suppose he looks in here before he pushes the door open.
So?
He'll spot you.
That's all right.
Look, if I'm going to stay awake, I'll need more coffee.
You.
Yeah?
Mr. Craig wants some more coffee.
Okay. There's your coffee, Mr. Craig.
Thanks. Well, it's an awful slow client I'm supposed to have.
He'll be along.
Maybe you frighten him off tonight. What happens tomorrow?
People run out of tomorrows sometimes.
Yeah.
All right, that could be him. Stay put, boys.
I could use a client.
Not this one. He won't be any use at all.
Too bad. Hey, Willie, what'd you put in this cup?
Huh?
Tastes more like concentrated lye than coffee.
Shut up.
It's an insult, not coffee. Here, you try it. It was hot, wasn't it? I'll take the gun now. Let go. What the?
So now we're on to Tuesday. And after we played the final week of Jeff Regan, we turned to an obscure series featuring a famous detective. It was a summer series of G.K. Chesterton's famous sleuth, Father Brown, starring Carl Swenson. We only have 2 episodes of it. It's a nice little series. We have an original story and an adaptation of Chesterton's classic, The Three Tools of Death, which they really did a good job on.
Car's outside.
Here, no, not so fast.
Get your breath. Sit down.
Father, you've heard of Aaron Armstrong, the philanthropist and lecturer?
Oh, Armstrong. The author of those bestsellers on how to be happy, etc. Has that such a tremendous following?
Yes, Father, that's the one.
Oh, yes. I've read his books. And I attended one of his lectures once in which he offered his followers an easy road to happiness, or heaven, as he called it.
That's the guy, Father.
Yes. As I remember, he apparently based his teachings on one of the Proverbs of Solomon. A merry heart doeth good like medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bones.
Uh-huh.
Yes. He believed in giving up all the physical appetites, smoking, overeating, and drinking. Oh, yes, and above all, he believed in being cheerful. He dealt with the drink problem with an enormous gaiety.
Well, he's dead.
What?
His body was discovered early this morning.
Well, you don't say. Where?
Right near his house, in a ditch on the parkway.
What happened?
Nobody knows. But according to the police, it looks like murder.
Did you say his house is close to the parkway?
Yes, on an embankment just above it.
Well, what makes the police think it wasn't an accident, Flambeau?
Well, he was wearing only his dressing gown. And another strange thing, Father. A small piece of rope was tied around one of his ankles.
Was any weapon found?
No, but it was apparent he'd been struck on the head by a huge instrument of some sort. Cuts and bruises on his...
Now, after this came Nero Wolfe. This was after I did something that I've never done since and put the question of what series we would do in Season 2 to a listener vote. And I put up Candy Matson and Nero Wolfe. I was wanting to see whether people would want an original-to-radio program or something that had some reputation from outside of radio. And Nero Wolfe came up the winner by a wide margin. And this perhaps should have been expected. While not quite as well known as Sherlock Holmes or Poirot or Sam Spade, Nero Wolfe has a large number of very loyal fans. And I think that number only increased with the Nero Wolfe Mystery Series that was released near the turn of the 21st century. It's a great series and very faithful to the books, and it's one of those things that I'm really grateful to doing this podcast for, because listeners turned me on to that series, and I absolutely adore it. I've not done a public vote since because I've gained confidence, and I've also gained a better understanding of what programs are out there, and began to get a really good grasp of what plans I have for the series. And in most cases, it's somewhat elementary. Even the Candy versus Nero vote was not particularly important, as it was the difference between what series we were going to play in Season 2 and which one we were going to play in Season 3. And I just think that there are better ways to engage the audience. Turning to the Nero Wolfe series itself, we start out with one episode from a World War II series that I think starred Santos Ortega. And then one from the amazing Nero Wolfe, which might reasonably lead the listener to expect Wolfe to have the proportionate strength of a spider or climb walls, but I promise that's not the case. It was a Nero Wolfe series starring Francis X. Bushman and Elliot Lewis. I mean, really good casting. Shame we only have one episode of it. And then we have 25 episodes of the New Adventures of Nero Wolfe. And I've actually gained more appreciation for the series in the years since we first did it on the podcast. I think I was a little serious at the time. Yeah, I think I was pretty incessant about pointing out all the ways it didn't live up to the books. And you can certainly understand why the author of the Nero Wolfe books, Rex Stout, stopped doing English language adaptations of his books. The Nero Wolfe books, at their heart, are not the strongest mystery novels you'll ever read. What makes them work so well are the characters, the intricacies of their relationships, and the degree to which Stout thinks out and develops different social groups, whether you're talking families or businesses. The problem is that you can't really do that much in a half-hour radio program. The writers kind of do their own thing. And I think on its own, The New Adventures of Nero Wolfe was a really enjoyable series if you can appreciate it for what it is. In addition, I don't think anyone was more suited to playing Nero Wolfe than Sidney Greenstreet. So these are quite enjoyable to listen to. It does leave me wishing a little bit that Greenstreet had been given an opportunity to play Wolfe in something a bit longer, like a movie or an hour-long program. But sometimes you can't get what you'd ideally want, and this series is definitely interesting.
Importance of money.
Archie, that will do. I'm not interested.
You will be when you learn you can make no more purchases of beer and Skittles. You've passed up 2-cinch cases now. Each would have meant a healthy fee. Let us hope this Mr. Blake has a nice, fat problem that will take us days to solve.
Archie.
Yes, sir?
Answer the door.
Good evening. I'm John Blake.
Oh, yes. Come in, Mr. Blake. You have no idea how welcome you are.
Archie, show Mr. Blake in and close the door. That draft is unbearable.
This way, sir. Mr. Wolfe doesn't care for anything resembling air. Oh, I'm Archie Goodwin.
Good evening, Mr. Blake.
Mr. Wolfe, I have a little business for you. Now, before you say anything, I know you're not a lawyer.
I'm not a member of the bar, let us say, Mr. Blake.
Of course.
What kind of business, Mr. Blake?
I have here a short will, which I have typewritten myself. I haven't signed it yet. Also, I have here a sealed envelope containing a letter which I want you to be prepared to deliver to the addressee.
A will and a letter. Very well.
Yes. Do you know who I am?
Seems that I've certainly seen you before.
Same here. I just can't place you.
Well, I'm John Blake, president of the Plymouth Building and Loan.
Oh, of course. I've seen your picture many times.
You have a staff of the best attorneys in the city, Mr. Blake, and this is most assuredly the business of attorney.
Perhaps. But in this particular instance, I wanted an individual who had no interest in me, nor previous knowledge of my affairs.
I see.
Also, I wanted a person who was, well, shall we say, not too well fixed.
Well, you certainly couldn't
Archie.
Imagine Mr. Wolfe.
Our final Tuesday series was Rogues Gallery. And I did Rogues Gallery in part to tide over the fans of Dick Powell, who were eager for me to get to Richard Diamond, Private Detective. I did my best to find opportunities to sprinkle in Dick Powell performances to slake people's hunger until we could finally get to Richard Diamond, which wouldn't happen until season 7. Now, Rogues Gallery is in many ways not as good a series as Richard Diamond. At the same time, I feel it's underrated. It gets known for a silly plot device where not only is Richard Rogue knocked out, he floats up to Cloud 8 and has a conversation with his alter ego. However, the series really does deserve to be known as the first hard-boiled private detective program on the air. It predated the earliest programs such as The Fat Man and Sam Spade. A real trailblazing program and fun at times. We do get a couple of other episodes. I enjoy Barry Sullivan as an actor, but I think that this episode, it may not even have been representative of his later run as Richard Rogue. And then at the start of season 3, we get another episode of Richard Rogue, this time from 1950, and starring Paul Stewart. Paul Stewart, of course, a fine actor, but the sound quality of that episode makes it hard to follow. Plus, he's doing the alter ego thing, which, I think in 1945 and 46 with Dick Powell, you could kind of tolerate it. It's a weird thing to have in 1950. Still, if you appreciate Dick Powell or the hard-boiled detective genre, this is a fun series to listen to.
Hello. hello, Frank.
Well, what are you doing here, Rogue?
Conchita invited me.
Sit down, please.
Thank you.
What is this, a surprise party on me, Conchita?
Mr. Rogue is working for me, Frank.
Yep. I came down to help Conchita recover some letters from you. How about it?
Nice of you to be interested, Rogue, but Conchita and I can take care of our own affairs without any outside assistance. Goodbye, Rogue.
No, I like it here. Where are the letters, Frank?
You bore me, Mr. Rogue. I wish you'd leave.
Make him give them to you, Richard Rogue.
I want those letters, Frank. You ever hear of blackmail?
I'm not blackmailing anybody. Those letters are mine. They came to me through the mail. If I want to keep them, I will.
But you're threatening me with them. That is illegal, isn't it, Mr. Rogue?
Sure. It's especially illegal for a guy who's out on parole.
Who's going to call the cops in on this deal? You, Conchita?
Mr. Rogue will handle it for me.
Look, sweetheart, it's no go. See? You and I'll just have to work this out our own way.
Hit him, Mr. Rogue. Kill him.
No. Now, there are ways of handling petty larceny pasties like Frank that you never heard of, Conchita. Look, Frank, you know you've got 2 strikes against you. Are you going to play ball with me?
Conchita's mine, and she's going to stay that way, Rogue. She's not getting away from me with your help or any other way. Well, I've asked you 2 or 3 times to get out of here, Rogue. Are you leaving?
No.
I'm sorry about this. I always liked you, Rogue. Oh, Smitty.
Yes, Mr. Maxon?
Will you ask the boys to throw Mr. Rogue out, please?
If thugs lay a hand on me, I'll break your neck, Maxon.
We'll see. Throw him out, boys.
It occurred to me as I hit the sidewalk with the back of my head, among other things, that Frank owned a piece of the Club Cuba, and that it was a bad place to start a beat.
Wednesdays continued to be Let George Do It, and I don't think there's a whole lot more to say about it. I think it continued to remain a strong series. Thursday and Friday were Sherlock Holmes and Johnny Dollar, but there were some changes I think that are worth talking about. Of course, on Sherlock Holmes, after 200 radio programs and 14 movies, Basil Rathbone was tired of the character and left the New Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. He was replaced immediately by Tom Conway. And I have to admit that what bothered me about the next 2 performances, perhaps the biggest thing, is it felt like they were doing a Basil Rathbone impersonation. And certainly that was the feeling of Basil Rathbone, because he kept getting asked about the series and about acting in it. And he had stopped acting in it. But the voice of both Tom Conway and successor John Stanley were pitched so they sounded a lot like Rathbones, but it felt like an impersonation. But that doesn't mean they were bad, certainly not. Tom Conway in particular, I think I probably had a little bit of missing Basil Rathbone blues when I started on listening to Mr. Conway, but I think he really settled into the role and did quite well.
A little more tea, Miss Bates?
No, thank you, Dr. Watson.
Then please go on with your story.
As I was saying, Mr. Holmes, I've known John, Mr. Harden, all my life. My father was the Harden coachman. And as I grew up, I thought John Vincent Harden was the most wonderful man in the world.
Well, I imagine that he was quite different then, my dear.
Very different. He was young and romantic, and he loved music. He took violin lessons, and it turned out that he was a prodigy.
I understand that he made his professional debut at the age of 13.
Yes, Mr. Holmes. I was only a little girl then. But he used to tell me that he wasn't John Vincent Harden, the heir to the tobacco millions. He was Giovanni Vincenti, the great violinist.
Giovanni Vincenti? Odd. Pray continue, Miss Bates.
For 5 years, it seemed that he would be a great musician. Then, on his 18th birthday, his father gave him a lecture on his family obligations, told him that it was his duty to go into the business. John broke his violin across his knee, Mr. Holmes, and he's never played since.
Miss Bates, I don't need to be a detective to deduce that you love him.
Of course I do. Or at least, I love Giovanni Vincenti. And maybe he's still there. Somehow. somewhere.
Of course. I've been an idiot, a numbskull.
What do you mean, Holmes?
The case is solved. Come, Miss Bates. We must return to Mr. Harden as fast as we can. I only hope we're not too late.
But why doesn't he answer? The servant said he locked himself in the study again.
The door's locked.
I don't like the look of this. Come on, Watson. We'll break it in. Once more.
Oh! Look! He's lying crumpled over his desk.
There's a revolver beside him, Holmes.
Miss Bates, please leave us. My friend's a doctor. He'll take care of him. He's only wounded.
Yes, it's just grazed his scalp.
Oh, thank heavens. I'll be waiting outside.
Obviously, this was attempted suicide. They finally succeeded in driving him mad.
Did they? Read this note lying here. It's in the same handwriting as the other messages.
I might try to fool another detective, but not you, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I admit I shot John Vincent Harden. I'm sure you'll have no difficulty discovering how I escaped from a locked room. Good Lord.
You'll observe that the note was written and blotted on this desk. Watson, I'll see to getting Mr. Harden to bed and summoning his own doctor. I want you to return to Baker Street.
To Baker Street? Why?
Though the case is solved, I have some heavy thinking to do, and I must do it here. So be a good fellow and go back to our lodgings and get me 2 ounces of shag tobacco. And...
I didn't think that Conway played as well off Nigel Bruce as Basil Rathbone did, and that they didn't quite gel as nicely. It seemed to be a bit more contentious. And then, of course, we got into the John Stanley era, and yeah, that was definitely a change, as there was a lot of bickering between Holmes and Watson in that particular take on the character. Stanley's take on the character could be a little bit more arrogant than previous performances, even while the voice sounds a lot like Basil Rathbone's. And of course, the ads are something where listener taste will vary. But the stories themselves really are interesting. Certainly, I think a lot of them lean more towards the somewhat more horrific elements, without ever getting too graphic. John Stanley run would feature the elusive agent, which is the only surviving serialized Sherlock Holmes story in old-time radio. So again, an interesting run of shows to listen to.
See, it was in the good old Baker Street days, a rather gloomy day in late October, to be exact. We had breakfasted late in front of a sea-coal fire. With my body in one easy chair and my legs upon another, I sat listening with growing irritation to Holmes as he practiced interminable scales, roulades, glissandos, and what have you on his violin. At last, a particularly screeching dissonance was more than my frazzled nerves could bear. Holmes, must you do that?
Calm yourself, my dear Watson. I was not responsible for that last bit of cacophony. It was caused by the scraping of a carriage wheel against our curbstone. I rather think we're about to receive a client, a lady, rather slight and agitated.
Oh, how can you possibly tell? You haven't even bothered to look out of the window.
My ears, Watson, are nearly as well trained as my eyes. The infinitesimal creak of the carriage springs as its passenger descended to the pavement indicate a slender person. The tap of French heels indicate a lady. The quickness of her step indicates that she's agitated. Yes, decidedly agitated.
Oh, I must say, Holmes, you have ears like a hawk.
Your metaphor is a trifle mixed, my dear Watson, but I accept your tribute. Come in.
Mr. Holmes? Mr. Sherlock Holmes?
Naturally. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson.
Oh, how do you do?
Oh, thank heavens you're at home. You must come at once, Mr. Holmes. She's been murdered, I know she has, and they'll blame Reggie. Dr. Tillinghurst is sent for Scotland Yard. Oh, Mr. Holmes, can't you do something?
My dear young lady, I can do a great many things, but not until you could give us a coherent account of your difficulty.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I have made a fool of myself. But the whole thing is so impossible. You see, she'd never commit suicide. Even at 89, she enjoyed life tremendously. And no one could have killed her because she was alone with the door bolted from the inside.
Who is this remarkable old lady, and why should anyone want to kill her?
She was Lady Blenkinsop. But who in the world would want to harm her? Oh, I'll admit she was eccentric and difficult at times. You know the French, Mr. Holmes. but it didn't frighten anyone, not even Bobo.
Bobo?
Oh, Bobo is her pug dog, terribly spoiled but devoted and funny, too.
Oh.
It was always with her, sitting on her lap or sleeping at the foot of her bed. Poor little thing. That's where we found him this morning when we broke in the door. Just stood there barking at the noise we made and wagging his tail at Dr. Tillinghurst.
Why did you break in the door?
Because it was still locked when Potters, he's the butler, brought up Lady Blenkinsop's early tea. She always locked herself in at night. Didn't want anyone to catch sight of her without her curls, I suspect.
But this morning was different, I gather.
Oh, yes, Mr. Holmes. I made her tea and a bit of toast at 9:30. You see, I'm her companion, but I do cook her breakfast and fix her a bit of lunch. There's a charwoman who comes in to do the heavy cleaning and cooks dinners. And Potters attends to the rest of the house.
Rather a meager domestic staff for a person of Lady Blenkinsop's standing, eh, what?
Is she hard up for funds?
Oh, no, I believe she's quite well off. Her own money, too. Of course, the Blenkinsop estates went to Reggie when Lady Blenkinsop's husband died.
And the John Stanley runs on Sherlock Holmes really provide a solid lot of episodes, and there were quite a few I really enjoyed. Still, I'm more than happy to own my biases and admit that there were some times I was pining for the good old days of Basil Rathbone. Johnny Dollar continued with Edmund O'Brien, really for all but the last 2 weeks of the season. O'Brien's acting continued to be good, even though it was often a really downbeat program. And of course, in the O'Brien era, there were a lot of missing episodes, as well as episodes with sound quality issues. So that can be a challenge to navigate. Also, the series began moving away from these sort of world-weary, hard-boiled stories that really suited O'Brien, and towards more mixing in police procedural elements with the insurance stories. And he continued to put up good performances and adjust as best he could. But he left in 1952, and then we got the John Lund era, and I feel since there only were 2 weeks that were covered with Lund as Dollar, that we should probably save the discussion of the Lund episodes for our Season 3 commentary. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the specials we played in Season 2. The first thing we did is our 300th episode special in December, and after playing Father Brown recently, I decided it'd be a great idea to do The Man Who Was Thursday. It was the Mercury Theater adaptation of a novel by G.K. Chesterton. It's a very unique and bit of a mind-bending story. It's one of the odder ones we've done on Great Detectives, but I really enjoyed it, and I hope you like it as well. For our 350th episode, we brought a Screen Guild Theater half-hour adaptation of The Mask of Demetrius, starring Peter Lorre and Sidney Greenstreet. Again, I think an appropriate one given that Sidney Greenstreet was also starring in The New Adventures of Nero Wolfe. I really like this episode. Subsequent to this, Warner Archives did go ahead and release the DVD version of the movie, and I think the movie is pretty good. It is one of those kind of subgenres where a lot of screen time is spent on our two heroes going and questioning other characters, leading to lengthy flashback segments they aren't in. And, you know, you can think of several movies that were done this way. The Killers is probably the most famous. The 1951 movie The Fat Man, which helped to introduce Rock Hudson, used a similar device. Both The Killers and Mask of Demetrius received radio adaptations, but in both cases they really pared that sort of thing down. Because when you've got half an hour, you really do have to move forward. Speaking of moving forward, for our 400th episode, we were able to bring you the Screen Directors Playhouse adaptation of DOA starring Edmund O'Brien, who we were also featuring in Johnny Dollar at the time. We are really fortunate to have a radio adaptation of DOA. It's a rare case when a public domain film had a radio adaptation, because it generally was popular movies that got adapted to the radio, and most of the films that didn't get their copyright renewed, part of it is they were just plain overlooked. For DOA, we really are fortunate that not only was it adapted, but we've got such a good copy of the recording. I think that DOA is just such a superb noir film. It's a must-see if you're a mystery fan, and if you've not seen it and you're on the fence, listen to the 400th episode special, and hopefully you'll take the plunge. For our 450th episode, I tried something different by doing a special in which I did 2 episodes of suspense unrelated in the same podcast. Of course, they were both standalone. I had the theme of World War II. They were 2 very different and very entertaining stories. Thought I might, do that with some specials, mash together a couple of half-hour stories. But I never received any feedback one way or another, so I never did another one of those. And then for our 500th episode special, we did the Lux Radio Theater presentation of To the Ends of the Earth. Now, the reason I chose this, and I don't think this will surprise anyone after the examples I've given, is that Dick Powell stars in it, and of course Dick Powell was playing Richard Rogue in Rogue's Gallery. This was actually a really good adaptation, a very suspenseful film that immediately draws you in, and it's such a great epic story. I was going to play a clip from it, but there's only one clip that I would go with, and I don't want to spoil the episode, so hopefully you'll just take my word for it and listen to that one when you get to the 500th episode special. Now, in terms of the podcast as a whole, other than the change in audio quality, which I referenced earlier, there was also a bit of a change in monetization. My overall approach to that. Throughout season 1 and into season 2, you hear me trying a lot of different affiliate programs, and there were even a couple of genuine sponsorship deals. But those essentially ended up drying up, and it ended up requiring a shift in the podcast. When I started out, I never intended to have listener support be a big part of the podcast. I imagined that we would have a sponsor or sponsors that would regularly make the podcast happen, particularly as we grew an audience. And I think we were either at or close to 5-figure audiences as you go into season 2. But sponsorship arrangements weren't coming along, which was kind of, it was a challenge because I'd had sponsors and different monetization things on the old Time Dragnet show, and the audience was quite a bit smaller. But the industry had started to change, and one particular sponsor who was sponsoring so many podcasts kind of pulled back, and a lot of other advertisers were a bit nervous about getting into sponsoring something they didn't fully understand in the wake of the Great Recession. There were still podcasts out there who were getting sponsors, either because of the name of the host or because they served some specific niche, like for business or technology, and those sponsors would be reaching directly to their audience as opposed to advertising in mass media, where they may get some people who are interested in their product and some who aren't. But that left a podcast like ours that was general interest in a bit of a bind. Though that doesn't mean I didn't try. I just got turned down a lot. I was definitely not comfortable fundraising. Some longtime listeners know this, but my father was an itinerant preacher, and he prided himself on not really asking for donations. He'd put a basket in the back and not mention it was there, and if anybody wanted to donate, they would just donate. It wasn't quite that low-key. Had, set up some donation pages in case people wanted to support it, but I hadn't begun any sort of big push. And I think I was inspired to reconsider that when I watched, of all things, if I remember this correctly, it was my favorite MST3K episode, Overdrawn at the Memory Bank, which was actually produced by a public television station and aired over PBS, not the MST3K version, the original film. And that just got me to thinking about the old public television fundraising drives I'd seen as a kid. And it made me think that what they were doing was raising money to be able to present something that they couldn't find commercial sponsors for. And I realized that this was something that could work for great detectives. And so I started the listener support campaigns, which became a twice annual tradition that continues to this day, recording here in 2022. And I think the big headline for that, and what I'll always be grateful for, is how listeners just stepped up to support the podcast and to help us to raise the funds that we need to be able to support the podcast. I offered a lot of items for listener support. I based them off of things that I enjoyed and would like to share with someone who donated the necessary funds, including a lot of audio drama downloads through audible.com. And, I think the first few years really pushed people and sent reminders to get them to choose something, and they would send me back, a choice of audio drama downloads, and I would go and buy it. And most cases they would download it. In many cases they didn't. I think I have something like 50 different audio dramas that were sent to people as listener support gifts, but they have not claimed to this day. Because people, by and large, just wanted to support the program, didn't care that much about the premium. But it's like, okay, he keeps asking, so we'll tell him. And if I had been less insistent, I perhaps would not have so many audio drama downloads that I bought that have never been used. But I really am grateful to listeners for their generosity. Sponsors and advertisers would be just kind of like these little blips that you'll hear. They come along for a while, but then not really last. But it was the listener support that really allowed us to be able to make it through. We had money when expenses came up related to the podcast. Even though we could get no other sort of monetization to golf long term until late 2020. We're really able to continue to do the podcast because of all the listeners who supported it and made it possible, and that is a really humbling fact. We really could not have made it so far without all of those listeners and supporters for those years. I will say that the segments for listener support do go a bit long, particularly in these early years, and I think I go so long because I still found it a bit uncomfortable. I think over the years I've gotten more comfortable with it because it's just become part of the way that content creators are able to make a living. Even if you do have paid ads on something like a YouTube channel or, a podcast, revenues are always changing for a wide variety of reasons that have nothing to do with your listeners, the number of listeners or downloads you have. And you can sometimes have things happen that are totally arbitrary. So that base of listener support for the vast majority of creators remains something that they do. It also means that in recent years, I haven't talked about it as much. I personally have given to various creators over the year and continue to do so. And I think that this system and approach does have a great benefit. One thing with the era of mass media is the only voices that could work were those who really got the approval of a network or approval of some big company. But in the information age, people have the ability to say, I like this thing, whether it's a video series or writing. I like this, and I'm willing to make it a reality. And so many folks just stepped up over the years, and that's why we're still here. And for that, we owe a debt to all of our great listeners.